Today we're going to upgrade the suspension on our 2018 Mustang GT with help from Pedders. When replacing the springs on your Mustang, it's never a bad idea to replace the shocks and struts at the same time. Now I know a lot of people buy springs, they never know which shock and strut to go with. Well, Pedders makes that very easy with their EziFit SportsRyder system, which will fit your 2015 through 2018 Mustang. The SportsRyder EziFit system provides direct replacement components for any 2015 through 2018 Mustang without a factory magnet ride option. Now, nice thing with the EziFit, there's no spring compressor or special tools required for installation. They provide you a completely assembled strut assembly for the front, along with new springs and new shocks for the back. This will lower your Mustang approximately 1.25 inches, and it's going to be a direct replacement for the factory components and much easier to install than a lot of other aftermarket pieces. For this installation, a lift and a pole jack or a jack and jack stands, 3/8 ratchet, 13mm socket, 15mm socket, 18mm socket, 1/2 inch ratchet, 21mm socket, 24mm socket, short extension, torque wrench, 17mm wrench, and a clip removal tool. We're going to start off under the hood. First thing you want to do is remove 2 of these nuts holding the strut mount and just loosen up the third. All right, now we're down the wheel well area. The first thing, obviously, remove your wheel, and then what we're going to do is remove the caliper by removing the 2 bolts on the back. We have to remove the caliper to get it out of the way to access the 2 nuts to separate the spindle from the strut. Now with the caliper off, just place it on the K-member safely out of the way. Don't let it hang from the hose. With the brake caliper out of the way, now we can start removing the strut from the car. Now the first step here is to remove the sway bar. You're going to hold it in the back with a 17mm wrench and remove the nut from the front. Now the last step is obviously to remove the nuts and bolts that hold the spindle to the strut. But before you do that, make sure you disconnect all the ABS lines. Just pop the clips off the strut and the mounts. All right, now we can separate the spindle from the strut. You're going to remove the nuts, but just screw them out to the very edge of the bolts, because then you have to hammer them through. Basically, you want to make sure this is out past the edge. That way you can hammer on the nut to push the bolt through without mushrooming the edge of the bolt. Because if you mushroom that, you'll never get these nuts back on. All right, now we can remove the nut we left loose up in the engine bay and remove the assembly from the car. With the original parts out, now we can install the EziFit from Pedders. You want to make sure this little notch here goes towards the engine. This one faces out. We're just going to get these hand tight for now. All right, now we can reconnect the spindle to the strut assembly using the factory hardware. Now these are splines, so the nuts will pull it through. Just give them a little tap, get them started. Now we'll torque these nuts to 184 foot-pound. All right, with those bolts tight, now we can reinstall the ABS line clips and then move on to the sway bar end link. And then the last step in the wheel well, reinstall the rotor and the caliper. All right, now come back up and tighten these down. And these will get torqued when we're done to 46 pound-feet. All right, now we'll repeat the process on the other side. We'll move on to the rears. Okay, with the front done, now we can move on to the back. Now the first thing we're going to do with the rear suspension is unbolt this brake line and then unbolt the shock, because we will have to actually lower down the subframe to remove the spring. Now we're going to go down here and remove these 2 bolts at the bottom so we can remove the shock and replace it with our new unit from Pedders. Now you will have to take the shock apart because the mount will have to be transferred over unless you bought a new one. To remove the spring, we have to lower the subframe. It requires us to remove 2 bolts. One's up here and there's one in the back. Before we can remove this bolt, we have to remove these 2 small ones up here so the bracket comes off with it. All right, now we're actually ready to lower down the subframe. Now before you do so, make sure you support it with a jack or a pole jack, and then we can lower it down by removing both bolts. Now we can lower down the subframe and remove the spring. We're ready to install the rear springs now. We transfer over the factory insulator that we're going to move over to the spring. Now, as far as the progressive spring, you're going to have some tighter coils. In actuality, it really doesn't matter if they're top or bottom, so it does not change the spring rate. There's a huge argument on this, which way is better. I always like these at the top. Brendan prefers them at the bottom, but either way, it doesn't matter. We're going with the top because I'm his boss. And make sure when the spring's in here, you're going to turn it until it fits into the factory isolator at the bottom. Then we can raise it back into place. The subframe back up, we can reinstall the bolts. All right, now we can reinstall the front bolt along with the 2 support bolts. We're ready to install the shock, and like I mentioned before, the one part you do have to remove from your factory shock is the mount. So to do that, remove the plastic cap, and remove the nut off the top so you can remove the mount. Now along with the mount, you want to transfer over your bump stop and the boot as well. All right, reinstall the plastic cover on the top and we're ready to install the shock in our car. Now we can install the Pedders EziFit shock using the factory hardware. Usually to bolt it in the control arm first and then up in the body. All right, then the last step here is to reinstall the brake line. Then you want to repeat the process on the other side, reinstall your wheels and tires, and your installation is finished. The SportsRyder EziFit suspension was an excellent choice for our 2018 Mustang. It gives it a really nice stance. Because the shocks and struts were designed to work with the springs, the ride quality and performance is excellent as well. The installation is actually easier because they are direct easy fits. Figure about 2 to 3 hours total. Be back on the road in no time.